Hello, everyone. Just wanted to kick off a new item for the Warhammer YouTubers. So this all started with Paul K last week, who posted a really cool video on skill or luck in Warhammer. What does Warhammer consist more of, and so on. And he invited video responses to it, and a lot of people did. Skaven and AZ made one, Ant touched on it some, Nicholas Belair touched on it, Shadows in the North. It's a long list. And I thought that was really cool because here was a interesting subject about Warhammer that kind of got brought up and fostered a lot of videos and content and discussion, which I found very illuminating and thought was really cool. And that made me think, why don't we kind of do that every week? And so hence this new video, the topic of the week. So it's the Warhammer YouTubers topic of the week. Consider this a video prompt of maybe a subject that we could discuss this week. So I absolutely invite all video responses that people are interested in making to this. If you find the subject interesting, if you think you got something to add, or you just want to respond back to my points, please do. I will post these up every week on Friday, and allow people to then sort of make videos over that week responding to it. I will update this video with links to all the other videos that get made. So I think I'm probably subscribed, hopefully, to everybody who will make a response video. And of course, I would encourage everybody to post it and share it on the Warhammer YouTubers, which if you're not a part of, you should certainly join. And but I will include all the links to all the response videos below, both on this video and all topics of the week going forward. So with that sort of bookkeeping out of the way, let's get to our first topic of the week. So our first topic of the week, suggested by Skaven and AZ, is comp, and talking about comp. So comp has become a very popular sort of topic in general over the past couple months, which doesn't surprise me for reasons that I'll get to in a little while. Obviously, what is comp? We'll just do some level setting, just in case people aren't as familiar. But comp is just a compact, it's some rule set that alters the basic assumptions of the out-of-the-box Warhammer. Comp could be something as simple as, at this event, at this tournament, there are no special characters. That could be a very light touch, simple comp. It could be something much more complicated and heavy-handed, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean it's in-depth, like Swedish comp. Which, if you're curious as to what some of the comp systems I talk about here are, all that information is online. I'll dig up some links and put those below too. So what comp is doing is obviously just changing the basic assumptions, right, in some way. Warhammer has a set of units and rules, and they are what they are. They're in the big red book in your army books, and comp changes that in some way and says, okay, we're not going to use what the basic rules say, we're going to do something else instead. Okay, fair enough. That's what comp is. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about in my video, and I certainly want to encourage discussion on this topic, is why. Why does comp even exist? Right? That seems like the simple first question to ask. Why do we even have a thing called comp? Why are there these compacts? Why couldn't we just all play out-of-the-box Warhammer? Isn't that good enough? Many games get played fairly out-of-the-box. Do we need a new special set of rules? And the answer, of course, phone goes off. The answer is, I think, actually more multifaceted than what a lot of people give it credit for. So, the general answer of why comp is necessary is balance. Warhammer is totally imbalanced. It's crazy. It's the Wild West of just nonsense and filth. And without comp, the game is unplayable. That's sort of the standard out-of-the-box answer. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't think balance plays some part in it. But I think the reality is that comp, Warhammer 8th edition, is the most balanced edition of Warhammer ever. I think that's a fairly non-controversial statement. If you go back into older editions, I mean, it would not be uncommon for one fig on the enemy board to quite easily be able to destroy your entire army. And I don't mean like the joking haha out of the box thing of like having that happen occasionally now. I'm not saying it can never happen. I'm just saying that is an out-of-the-box occurrence. Whereas before, it would, in some older editions, it would not have been that weird. So this is probably the most balanced edition, yet seemingly there is still filth around, right? So we have to introduce comp to bring things back into balance. Well, maybe. My problem with that explanation is that there's always going to be power differential. I don't know that it is entirely possible to actually balance a game of this magnitude and size. We all want tons of armies, and we all want tons of units. We like different stuff and, you know, cool and interesting special abilities and stuff like that. And when you get that many things in the mix, the reality is imbalance is going to happen. Okay, there is not enough playtesting in the world. There will always be bad matchups. There will always be things that are off kilter, especially when compared against certain other things. It is the nature of the beast. I've talked about this in previous videos. That being said, I think comp there are still going to be outliers that are completely terrible. Like, those probably could have been caught in testing, but there will always be outliers, even in very, very heavily tested games. So take Magic the Gathering, for example. That game is heavily playtested by a massive community of very professional people. And yet, every couple sets, there will be this one outlier that happens, a card that sneaks through that just completely destroys the meta. Okay? So there's always going to be something. Now, so comp can help to steer back from those big outliers, right? It can also kind of course correct on armies in general that may have gotten the short end of the stick. So if we're talking about balance not at the individual unit level, but at the army level, it can at a broader level help to steer some of those armies that maybe got left out, bring them back up into the mix. So some comp systems will give things like Tomb Kings or Beastmen some extra points. Like if it's a 2,500 point tournament, they might get, you know, 2,700 points or something like that. Okay, so that's fair. In that regard, it can foster balance. But I think that that's not really, I think that's where a lot of people end the story, and to me, that's only the beginning. Because the reality is, even under all of these comp systems, there's still going to be stuff that's better than the other things. No matter how you balance it, cost it, weight it, choice it, some things are just going to be better. Some armies, some units. And if you want proof of that, look at dwarves in the current Swedish meta, right? Like, there's an example of where the comp system created a new powerhouse. Under, say, uncomped Warhammer, they are what they are. They're probably mid-tier. But in Swedish, they're quite good. It moves them up. So it reorients the rankings. But it doesn't completely balance the system. It's not like all of a sudden we have this perfectly balanced game because of any comp system. And I don't think anybody's under that delusion. And so, but that example is, I think, the next reason why comp exists. And I think it's one of the more valuable pieces, in that it alters the meta. One of the truths of Warhammer since its inception in 1983 is that it's honestly, by the standards of a lot of competitive games, fairly slow to evolve. If you have an army book, and every time previous to now, previous to end times, if you have an army book, that might be the only time your army is touched in a 4 or 5 year period. I've talked about this previously. So what you get is what you get. And new army books aren't always big enough to shake up the meta. Sometimes they literally just change the way that person is playing, but the army itself maybe stays kind of where it is. It's not that an army book can't, you know, comet the meta and completely change things, but it's not often. So let's say, at best, once a year under the old world, an army book would completely change the meta, and that's probably being fairly liberal with that. What that means is that you have a fairly stagnant, slow evolving thing, and people are able to get in and unlock everything, and metas can get static and set, where certain armies are on the top, and certain builds are on the top, and that's just what it is. So the other thing that comp does is it alters that meta. It kills out your ability to take certain units or put all of those good units together into one army, depending on the comp system, and makes it so different armies are good, different units are good. And what's funny is there are all sorts of second-order consequences here. We tend to only think of the first-order consequences, like this thing is now more expensive to take and you can't put these 3 units together. So hence, I have done that. That's a first order consequence. The comp directly prevented that thing from happening. I can't take these 3 toys I wanted and put them all together. But there are a lot of second order consequences as well. So, for example, if the comp prevents certain things from happening, and so people go down deeper into other units they might not normally take, and that unit becomes more prevalent or popular, the second order consequence could be other armies, without heeding the comp at all or needing the comp adjustment, change what they build and start taking different units that under normal circumstances might not have a lot of use. You know, they're a rock looking for a pair of scissors, but under the normal meta there were just no scissors around. Scissors weren't in popular use. It was all paper. But because the comp changed it to a lot of people using scissors, now your rock got more valuable. And so even though, regardless of the comp and your incentives, you now suddenly start taking some rocks. Okay? Because they are more valuable given the other person's response to comp. And so I think that helps keep the game fresh and interesting. Tied into that is it lets you play with other units you might not normally play with. And let's be honest, we all probably have, with our main armies, especially the ones we love, we probably have a big collection. You can't really see them, they're blocked by the paint, but there's a big thing of Skaven back there. And there's plenty of units in that Skaven army I never use. But a great example of something that Swedish comp you see a lot of people take suddenly is Giselles. I always loved Giselles, going way back into older editions when they were absolute monster guns. And so I have a lot of built-up nostalgic love for them. And under Swedish, they're not that bad. I still wouldn't say they're great, but they're not a point sync choice like they might be under general uncomp Warhammer. Okay. So altering the meta lets us play with different stuff, changes expectations, prevents the sort of predictive analytics you can do to just say, well, I'm taking this, it's one of the best armies, the field will be this, so I know I'll do well, and blah, blah, blah. And that leads me to my last point of what comp does, which I think is very good, and it's sort of the last thing that I think is of high value I don't hear a lot of people talk about. And that is, it creates discomfort. Which, that might sound negative at first. Why would you want to create discomfort with your players? Because good games have to create discomfort. That is what makes them good. If a game is simply all positive all the time with no discomfort you're seeking to overcome, then it will be boring and you will forget about it. And that may sound weird, but it is absolutely the case. The most successful role-playing games, card games, all these things have built-in mechanics that force the player into situations of discomfort. Because when human beings are forced into positions of discomfort, we seek to overcome them. It is a challenge. It is thought-provoking. It's something we now care about and want to fix. That breeds engagement. Okay? And that is what comp does. Comp puts you out of your comfort zone. It makes you take unfamiliar units. It creates unfamiliar metas. It creates discomfort and creates a puzzle, a challenge that you have to unlock. And it sort of re-engages you with the hobby in a way, in a mode of thought you weren't previously engaging in. So that's why I think comp is around, and also, as a corollary, what some of the benefits are of it. So those are my thoughts on that. I'll be very interested to see, and hopefully some of the response videos and other thoughts, what you all think. The next thing I want to touch on is just quickly what are the types of comp. And I'll move through this stuff quickly and I'm not going to get too deep into them because I feel like there are a lot of people, especially response videos could be made where people go into this a lot deeper. And I don't have the expertise that some of these other players who've played under a lot of different comp systems more regularly have. So I'll let them, other people, please pick up this part and cover for my weakness here. Obviously, to me, the 3 chief comp systems that most often get used are Swedish, which is obviously this big mathematical system, wherein every unit has weight, it has a cost to it effectively, and you're subtracting that down, and you get a score between 0 or in the negatives at some point in time, and 20, but generally 0 and 20. ETC, which is very straightforward now. It basically, every army has 5 choices, 5 points, I should say, 5 units of power they can spend, 5 power units, and things in your army cost those power units. not necessarily linearly. So one hell pit is one power unit, one choice. But two hell pits is three, if I remember right off the top of my head. I don't have ETC up in front of me, but there you go. And so on and so forth. And then the final sort of comp system is panel comp. And panel comp can be either completely like a judge, like a 5-judge panel that looks at every army and assigns it a score. They'll usually use either like a 1 through 5, or maybe they'll use like a Swedish type number of 0 through 20. And then that can be sometimes mixed with player-based comp as well, where maybe each player you play assigns you a comp score, and that's sort of compared against your judge comp, and then a delta is generated, and that's your final comp score that adds to your battle points. All three of those have strengths and weaknesses. Like I said, I'll leave it to other people to cover them. What's interesting about all of them to me is that each of them creates a barrier of entry to the tournament they exist for. So I'll kind of move that. I'll move away from getting into a lot of detail, let other people handle that, and I'll talk about the problems. And one of the big ones to me is the barrier of entry. Heavy comp systems, especially things like Swedish, are really not new player friendly. Okay? Because not only is the system itself fairly obtuse, I mean, if you're mathematically minded, it's not that complicated, but it's also not incredibly easy. I know plenty of people who play this game who aren't exactly math wizards, and when they look at Swedish comp, their kind of eyes roll back in their head and their brain starts to hurt a little. And those people will just tend to not go to a Swedish tournament. Maybe that's good. If you're trying to sort of pre-select out and only have a certain type of player, using a more complex system like Swedish could be exactly the way you sort of force a selection. The problem is if the other player doesn't realize that and just kind of dives in and makes an army, but really doesn't understand what's good in Swedish comp, that can be a real problem. You can sort of, those people are primed to have a bad time at your tournament. Now, the simpler the comp system, the less of a barrier of entry it is. If the comp system is just no special characters, well, that's not really much of a barrier of entry. The person just doesn't take those things. But in a fairly complex system like Swedish, you're effectively inviting people who are newer to have a bad time, which is dangerous, because new people are the lifeblood of the hobby. We need those new people. And if they show up to a tournament and don't really understand Swedish, and I've heard this on tons of podcasts and videos where people talk about Swedish comp, you have to understand how to make an army in Swedish to be good at Swedish. It's a different sort of thing, because not only do you have to understand the system, you have to understand the meta it creates and understand the types of units that are good and the type of play it encourages, because it does also, that's the last piece, these comp systems can force a different type of play. Because once you get that score in Swedish comp, 8, 14, whatever, that usually creates a victory point differential you have to overcome. So if you have a score of 8 and your opponent has a score of 14, in general, under sort of standard Swedish comp setups, they're up 600 victory points on you at the start of the game. Basically the difference in number times 100. That's a lot of victory points. And so you tend to play differently under Swedish than you would under sort of uncomped Warhammer. And if somebody doesn't know that and just keeps getting their butt handed to them, or is facing a style of game that they weren't expecting, that can be a negative time. So I think that that's important for us, for people who are experienced, who've been playing this game for a long time, and who want the challenges and the alternate meta and the discomfort that comp brings. We, at the same time, need to be respectful and understanding of the fact that newer players might not be having the same positive experience that we are out of it. The value proposition is different depending on your experience level. And so the final thing I'll say on comp here, so I don't go on forever on this, is comp really necessary? So I've talked about all this, and it's hard for us to picture a world now where there's no comp. But even under an unbalanced, system of Warhammer, I'm not sure comp is always necessary. There could be other solutions. So Warmahordes handles this sort of thing through the multi-list selection, right? You have a couple lists, and you choose which list you use for the tournament based on sort of what you're doing. I think that would be almost impossible to implement in Warhammer because it's hard enough to transport one huge army. I can't imagine transporting two or three. But one idea we could steal from something like Magic is the idea of sideboards. This is not me creating this. This got made up by somebody else, and I apologize who suggested this. It might have been on Materim's show. I don't really know. But I love the sideboard idea. I'm not sure. I'm sure there are problems. I know that. But I think it would be neat. In Magic, there's the idea of the 15-card sideboard, which effectively works out to 25% of your deck, are alternate cards that after the game you can sort of switch out. And I think it might be neat if, especially in open list tourneys, if you could sideboard. If you had maybe 500 points, that you had to pick units that sat in this 500 points, but as you started the game, you could switch and swap them out, and you have to make sort of equal trades, equal or less, like you're allowed to show up with less points, I guess, if you really want. You could trade an 80-point unit for a 70-point unit or something, and that would be legit. But I think that's a cool idea, so you could kind of change your list a little on the fly to meet the individual matchup. I don't know how much it would actually change the game. Maybe some, maybe not at all. Hard to say. I think it's a cool idea and worth talking about. I love sideboarding in Magic. I think it's one of the things that makes Magic tournaments work. So I think it's at least worth exploring from a Warhammer perspective. And the final note is of what could make comp unnecessary is scenarios. And that sounds weird at first, but I think they have a direct correlation. Powerful lists, sort of the uber powerful lists, to go back to what we started with balance, power lists come about when all you need is kill. Because those units tend to do very good at this particular thing, which is aiming toward tabling your opponent, right? Achieving more victory points. But if that's not always the goal, if the goal is take and hold and table quarters and grab something and run it off the board, or grab 3 things and make checks, or have fortitude in X zones, or whatever. Okay, it doesn't need to be complicated. It could be very simple, but better than the scenarios we have in the book, because the scenarios we have in the book right now honestly tend to be more setup based rather than necessarily outcome based. Under those things where you have extremely different scenarios and all you need is kill is wrong, you have to be able to move and run and have fortitude in positions and kill, suddenly one army list isn't necessarily the right answer. You're going to need several different you're going to need a much more jack-of-all-trades toolbox army rather than just the gang of the most brutal murderers you can possibly recruit. And so scenarios, if we're around and we're compelling, would also at the same time decrease the need for comp. Maybe to the point where it wasn't even necessary, or at least it could be a very minor touch. So, those are my thoughts on comp, but I want to see your thoughts on comp and your responses. Remember, we'll do a new topic of the week every Friday. Feel free to make a video and respond to it. You can email me if you want when you put it up. If I see it, I'm probably subscribed to all of you, or if I see it on the Warhammer YouTubers, I will add its link to this video so that everybody can go along and watch everything. But I look forward to seeing what everybody says, and as always, see you next time.